Welcome to DataVu-PC and the RSA USB Realtime Spectrum Analyzers. In this video, we'll demonstrate some of the combined capabilities of DataVu-PC and the RSA, as well as even dual RSAs. Today we have an RSA 500 series analyzer and an RSA 306. Let's begin by attaching the 500 series to the laptop using the USB cable. We've already attached power and the antenna as well as the trigger. Now let's click on the RSA Live View 1. Now it's connecting to the RSA 500. And as you can see, that's a replica of what you would see in the Tektronix DPX plot. Now let's talk about each one of the fields underneath the plot so you can understand how best to use them. Min and max display power set the scales for the DPX display. Display mode gives you a choice of DPX view or spectrum traces. If you want to see bandwidths greater than 40 megahertz, you'll need to use the spectrum traces mode. Pause will simply pause the updates on the screen. Preset will preset the instrument. Align will align the instrument, and it's a good idea to align the RSA if you're going to capture critical data. Since this is a 500 series RSA, you have control of when the preamp is turned on. The program automatically detects that and gives you the proper controls. Just like any RSA, you can select the center frequency, span, reference level, and resolution bandwidths. On the bottom row are the data capture controls. The capture type is either going to be free run or triggered. In free run, you'll manually start the capture using the start button. In triggered mode, you have the choice of an external trigger or a power level trigger. The power level trigger is calculated in the time domain, and when it's exceeded, the capture will start. For an external trigger, you need a 5-volt TTL signal connected to the trigger input on the RSA. For today, I have a simple homemade trigger device using 4 AA batteries and a simple wire to trigger the signal. But an oscilloscope or some other triggering device would be more typical. The record duration is set in seconds or samples. Make sure you use the proper label. Location is the name of the file you want to create, and you can use the browse button to find the right location. At the very bottom, you have the progress bar that shows you how far you are into the recording. The start button begins the recording in free run mode and arms the trigger in either of the trigger modes. Okay, let's capture some data. The simplest function is a free run capture for 1 second to a file called newrecording.xstat. All we have to do here is click the start button. Now let's look at that file in DataVu-PC. We'll click on the Load File button and select the new recording.xstat. And here you have your data. Loading or playing a file does disable the live view, so you'll have to reopen the window to do your next capture. Now let's do a power level trigger. We'll set the capture type to triggered, trigger to RF power trigger, trigger level to -20, and let's change the file name to new recording 2. Now when we hit start, fairly quickly, there's a signal that exceeds -20 dBm in the time domain. Now let's set up an external trigger to capture in new recording 3. Notice how the start button becomes a force button. That will let you manually start the capture in case your trigger isn't triggered properly for some reason. We'll trigger this with my battery device now. Those are the basics to recording a file. Now let's attach a second RSA. In this case, we're using a 306 for our second RSA. Let's use the RSA Live View button to bring up the display. As you can see, the screen is identical to the one above for the 507, except there's no preamp control for the 306. The preamp is automatically turned on and off based on your other settings. You can obviously have different display settings and set the RSA to its own center frequency, span, reference level, and resolution bandwidth. Now let's show a really useful feature for when I'm searching for an unknown signal or monitoring a certain bandwidth. To do this, let's switch the display mode on RSA Live View 1 to the spectrum traces. Now you can see a really wide bandwidth. At this point, we're looking at about 4.8 gigahertz. Now we can simply use our cursor and zoom in on different signals that we see. This allows us to see a very broad bandwidth in one display and narrow down to take a closer look in the other. You can change the span, reference level, and bandwidth as needed for each of these frequency locations. We can also capture dual channel using these two RSAs. Let's set live view 1 back to the DPX view. Let's capture something in the cell phone band. Let's say something around 1940 and 1980 megahertz. Let's do an external capture, and we'll tie the triggers together and trigger them with my homemade battery device. We'll click on the Start Capture for both of these to arm the triggers. Now we have a simultaneous recording of these two bands. I hope you can see how powerful it is to combine DataVu-PC and one or two RSAs. Thanks for watching.
Find out more at Vicom's website.